Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening. My name is Samantha Pardo. I'm the Assistant Director of Graduate Career Services here at the Mark School. I'm joined with my colleague Suzanne Grossman, and today we are so excited to be hosting or co-hosting this HEA Fireside chat with Dean Emeritus John Mogulescu. I'm going to turn just an overview of how today's session is going to work. We are going to have a panel session hosted with Professor Coughlan. And towards the end, we'll open it up for Q&A. If you have any questions that you have steaming at that you're like, oh, throughout the chat, I need to ask this right away, we'll keep an eye on the chat and I'll present it at the end. We'll also be open to anyone who can unmute as well. If just in the chat, if you can just tell us if you are an HEA alum, an HEA student, if you're a CUNY employee, where are you joining us from? We know that this session today was open to our vast CUNY community, so we're very excited to have you all here. And so from here, I will now pass it over to our HEA faculty director, Scott Evenbeck.
Well, welcome everybody. I'm really glad that John took time to write his book. I enjoyed reading it a lot, and I think CUNY really came into its own during the years about which John writes, and so much of that was a function of John's capacity for developing, implementing, and assessing programs. He was my main contact when I joined CUNY in 2010, and I enjoyed my very many regular visits up to 80th Street for Central. And I mean, John probably knows this. I liked 80th Street a lot better than 42nd Street. It was a much more intimate place to go visit with people. I don't know if I should report on this, but one of the main things I remember about John is how he wore running shoes. And I thought, well, if he could wear running shoes, I could wear running shoes. And so I think he needed those running shoes, and he often walked to meetings, all over the city. And he needed those running shoes because he was moving fast, getting an incredible amount done. And John, I personally, and on behalf of the program, very much appreciate your carving out time tonight to talk with our students. They're leaders in higher ed now. A number of them are graduates, and they're the future of higher ed administration. We appreciate your being here.
Thanks for kicking us off, Scott. Thank you all for joining. For those of you who I don't know, my name is Ryan Coughlan. I'm an associate professor in our higher education administration program. And there's a lot for us to cover tonight. But before we do, I just want to say a few things. Number one, we would love for all of you to join this conversation as much as possible. So there's sort of two ways to do that. The first is, as we're going through the conversation that John and I are going to have together, I encourage you to drop any questions that you have right into our chat, and we'll make sure that we save time for those towards the end. Also, as Sam noted at the start, we will certainly save about 30 minutes at the end for folks to unmute and ask questions. Those of you who have been with me in an online space before probably know what's about to come next, but I'm very grateful that you're all here, and I invite folks to turn your cameras on if you're able to do so. I know that you might not be in a place where you can do that, but if you are, I encourage you to do that so that we can have more of a sense of community in this Zoom world that we all exist in. If not, totally understand that you are where you are in the world, but thanks for being here with us. So John, thank you so much. I'll just let folks know, John and I had a pretty extensive conversation a few weeks back about his book and about his career. We also spoke quite a bit about the Mark School and the higher ed administration program. And so he asked me not to share any of these questions in advance. So I'll just preface it with that. And let me just dive in. I want to sort of note, John's a lifelong New Yorker, and from reading his book and from talking to him, I know that he holds a deep affection for our city and those of us who live here. And so I'd like to just start by asking John about how his experience growing up in New York shaped how he eventually came to serve not only CUNY, but the city of New York more broadly.
Thanks, Ryan. Scott, thank you for that great introduction. I greatly appreciate in our time together. And to the students, we're in a pretty terrible time right now in this country. And so I appreciate that you're taking the time to engage in this. Hopefully this will be an interesting conversation. And I'm really looking forward to it. And the question of my upbringing and how it framed my life, I'll be very brief, but I'm a Brooklyn kid. I love New York City, but I particularly love Brooklyn. And I grew up here, went to public schools in the city. I was an athlete. I was a recruited athlete and wound up at an elite college, Brown, where I never felt I belonged. I did play, sports but the athletes self-segregated. They didn't take advantage of our opportunity. We didn't think we were as smart as everyone else. And, when I graduated college, I was hardly in the top of my class. But there was the war in Vietnam was raging. And I desperately did not want to fight in that war. And so I taught elementary school in Brooklyn, in a poor neighborhood in Brooklyn that's no longer poor, Fort Greene. Didn't know what I was doing, had never been in a classroom before, but it helped me frame, my thinking about the beginning of education. Why was it that so many kids were so far behind when they were 12 years old already? I lasted 3 years as a teacher. To this day, it was the hardest thing I ever did. And I went to then graduate school in social work, but I wasn't going to be a clinical social worker. I was going to be a community organizer. I majored in community organizing. I was going to change the world, or with help of others. We were going to try in that period of time. We were optimistic that the world could be changed. And I was given a field placement 3 days a week that was then called New York City Community College. It's now New York City College of Technology. And I had no idea what I was doing at a community college. I didn't really know what a community college was or what it did, even though this particular one was in downtown Brooklyn. I could almost walk there from my house. So I showed up the first day and met the Dean of Continuing Education, non-credit side of the house. She came out to greet me. I was 24, 25 years of age. To me, she looked like she was 100, but she wasn't. But she had gray hair like Scott. And an hour later, my life had changed. The woman was extraordinary. Her name was Fanny Eisenstein. She let us know that if you were in continuing ed, we were going to influence the city and we were going to deal with disadvantaged students. And she gave me an assignment to work at the Brooklyn House of Detention, which was in downtown Brooklyn. It was a jail that housed 2,000 inmates who were awaiting trial, and said, I want you to start its first education program in that jail. And okay, I'd never been in a jail before. Went down, organized a literacy program based on my own public school teaching experience. Miraculously, wrote a grant proposal that year as a graduate student. The grant was funded, and I stayed on working 3 years in that jail pretty much every day, being a part of the community college community. And that public school experience and that jail experience framed a lot of my thinking about inequality, about why it was that so many people were not treated fairly in this city. You could only open your eyes in the jail. I mean, the jail, 2,000 men waiting trial, 90% of them were Black and brown. And so I began to think about that and then in continuing ed at that college, we ran literacy programs, second language, workforce development, programs for deaf and hearing impaired. And every time there was an opportunity to get some kind of program grant, Fanny said, yes, let's go ahead. So that's the beginning, Ryan, of framing my background. And I was blessed to have this woman as my mentor. I will say that last thing, but 12 years later, I was her deputy, and she was forced to retire. There was a mandatory retirement age of 70 in those days. And I hoped to become the dean. I didn't get the job and wound up in the central office of CUNY, which turned out to be not a bad thing for me long term. But I'll stop, Ryan, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so you're gonna see John has been involved in so much over the course of his career. I'm actually gonna just drop the link to information about his book for folks. So if you're interested in taking a look at that, we're not going to be able to cover nearly any any bit of a drop of what he actually has done in his career tonight. But I recommend grabbing the book and taking a read of it if you get a chance. But that said, John, you actually brought up a point that I wasn't going to ask about, but since you are speaking a bit about the mentorship you received from Fanny, and since I know that so many of our students and some of our younger alumni are really trying to build those kinds of meaningful mentor relationships as they look to advance their own careers and be as impactful as possible, I'm wondering if you could just share any advice you have for them around finding a good mentor and being a good mentee and cultivating that kind of bond.
Yeah. Well, sometimes it's not so easy to find a good mentor. I mean, by the way, I would say for those of you, when you're ready to change jobs, not necessarily looking for a mentor, but looking to make sure you know who you're reporting to, because that can make such a huge difference in both your happiness and your success. The question of what I learned from Fanny, I mean, the question of how you choose a mentor, one, that's someone you admire, right? And someone you think does good work, whose values are consistent with your own. And she had all of those qualities and more. And then I would almost say, what did I learn from her, Ryan, in terms of, as opposed to, and I don't know how this stuff will resonate with everybody, because the world has changed. But she said you have to hire talented people when you get a chance. I mean, because they will make you look good, and that you need to say yes to opportunity. When someone gives you an opportunity, immediately you can't say you can't possibly do it. You have to say yes, and that's fine. You have to be able to build relationships. You need to be able to partner, let people think they're good, particularly people you're supervising. She was a fanatic about paying attention to detail. She welcomed new ideas, but she also felt you had to be able to implement, and she held you accountable. And so, that was part of what I admired in her. Just a little sidebar about her. Now, I know Scott will know this movie, but I don't know how many of you will. One day, one of our staff was reading a memoir done by Arthur Lawrence, who was a very prominent screenwriter, director. He did West Side Story and a bunch of other things. And he was also the person who did the screenplay for the film The Way We Were with Barbara Streisand and Robert Redford. I don't know if any of you saw this movie, but it was a movie of our times. And Lawrence writes in his book that he couldn't figure out the Barbara Streisand character. And he was at Streisand's house. He couldn't concentrate. And all of a sudden he said he had it. And he said, I went to Cornell in 1935, 36. And there was this fiery radical woman, freshman at Cornell, who was giving speeches all over the campus about the impending peril of Hitler coming to power and Franco in Spain. And he said, I knew I had my character. That turned out to be Fanny. And we went to Fanny and we said, Fanny, you never mentioned that you were the character in this. And there was a very prominent movie, a very famous song related to it. And she just kind of shrugged and, didn't make a big deal. And that's another thing I would say, as you gain authority, as you get, more involved in your career, that you have some humility as well. And I hope that I've had that. So I don't know, mentors are tricky. Someone has to embrace you as opposed to you just saying, will you be my mentor? And it kind of evolves. And for me, I became a favorite of Fanny and became her deputy. And she was extraordinary at picking staff, being willing to speak her mind, not being afraid, and feeling that a university has to do more than just degree programs and serve the city that it resides in. So I'll stop, Ryan, at that.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, John. I appreciate that. So for those of you who have not had a chance to read John's book yet, you may have some guesses as to where the title of his book, The Dean of New Things, comes from. But I'll tell you, you'll learn this earlier on in the book, that during an interview with Rick Versman, Rick actually dubbed John the Dean of New Things. And in that interview, and I'll pull this quote directly from the book here, Rick said that you are an unstoppable force bent on breaking down educational and career barriers for New Yorkers of all backgrounds. And one of the things that we talked about, particularly in our intro to higher education class here, is just all of the ways in which in post-secondary education, we face these incredible countervailing forces to reform. And you accomplished so much over the course of your time at CUNY. Being called unstoppable is I mean, that's quite the honorific there in a system like this. So I'm wondering, like, what contributed to you being unstoppable in a system like CUNY and in post-secondary education more broadly?
I think, I'm just trying to think how best to do that. I think in terms of, first of all, it's unstoppable. That's great to hear. I mean, that's very nice. But one, I was fortunate to have great bosses. I came to the central office in 1986. We were an office of adult and continuing ed, had just been started in 1984. And my boss was a woman by the name of Regina Peruggi, who was terrific. And we were a team. We had 4 people in the office. And Regina left to become a president of Marymount Manhattan College, ultimately became president of Kingsborough, and was, and I became the university dean for adult and continuing ed in 1990. And then we had a guy by the name of Richard Freeland, who was the vice chancellor of academic affairs. And Richard was equally terrific. And he didn't care that we were the non-credit arm, even though he was a serious academic, and went on to be the president of Northeastern for 10 years. But the biggest break was that in 1999, the university picked a new chancellor, Matthew Goldstein. And I had known Goldstein because he had been the president of the Research Foundation of CUNY and also the president of Baruch. And he knew me a little bit. And he kind of, by then, that unit of 4 people, we were probably 150 by then. We had developed a whole host of programs, all funded with outside money: literacy, high school equivalency, second language. We had revised the ESL program in the university for something called the CUNY Language Immersion Program. We had worked with John Kennedy Jr. on programs for people with developmental disabilities, which was his cause. And Matthew recognized that we had talent, and he wanted to move us to deal more with the credit side and the fact that so few students were graduating in any reasonable time frame at our community colleges and many of our senior colleges. And he turned to our unit, this group of non-traditional folks. I have an MSW, and he gave me the title of Senior University Dean for Academic Affairs, which I guess is usually someone with some PhD. And I'm not arguing that you shouldn't have that, but he didn't care. He wanted results. And so at that point, I felt he would always have our back. And for the next 10-year period, I mean, we built 2 colleges. We created ASAP, the most successful community college program kind of in the history of the United States. And we can talk a little bit about that. We did CUNY Start. We did, more. We worked with the NYPD. We worked with homeless services, with correction, with ACS. And we just, and every time we got a new grant, we hired people on the grant. And those people, we wanted to have them be creative and get more money. And units that were small when they started with one grant because we had good talent and we were good at picking people became large. So, and Goldstein also realized that you had to have strong relationships with the New York City Department of Education. That in fact, we got 80% of our students from that one system. And we needed to figure out how that happened. And my team oversaw all of that, and we got involved with College Now, which many of you probably know about, to let high school students take college credit classes. And, by the end, we were working at 450 high schools. And we had a team of 120 people in our unit right in central office. And we did odd things as well. And if I'm going on too long, Ryan, you'll interrupt me. But, one of my staff came to us and said, we need to do something for the kids who've left public school. I said, what do you want to do? He said, let's create our own school and we'll run it. We'll run it out of the central office. And we happened to get money from DYCD. By then, our reputation was such that city agencies wanted to work with us because we were really good at what we did. And we would deliver and we measured things. And we opened a school in the Bronx for kids 16 to 22 called CUNY Prep. Hired a 29-year-old young guy, Derek Griffith, who was truly extraordinary. He just, I can't even explain it. Unfortunately, in the saddest moment, I have this in the book. I mean, he died in the Amtrak train crash when he was in Philadelphia when he was 40 years old. But we did these kinds of unusual things, and Goldstein didn't care as long as we could support it. We brought a theater program in from NYU, and we started this School of Professional Studies, and each of these programs has a story. So let me pause, Ryan, and let you take over that.
I'm going to turn to let's dive deep into one of those programs. Ahead of tonight's event, we had a few questions submitted, and one of them was actually about ASAP. And the moment when you mentioned it, I saw Stephanie, who's with us tonight, who works for ASAP, nodding and smiling when you mentioned.
Hi, Stephanie. Okay.
I suspect if there's anyone else here who has worked with ASAP or has experience with ASAP, raise your hand or drop it into the chat and say hi. But John, why don't we dive into ASAP a little bit and talk about its origins and perhaps any sticking points that you encountered as you were bringing it to life?
Stephanie, where are you working at ASAP? Just curious.
City Sec.
Oh my goodness! Of course,
behind me.
I see it. Well, that's New York City Community College. That was what was New York City Community College, and in truth, for almost 20 years, my wife was the provost at City Tech.
Oh wow,
Bonnie August. So but that's beside the point. But small world kind of thing. So in 2002, Matt Goldstein goes to Mayor Bloomberg, and he says our graduation rates and Scott can clearly relate to this. Our graduation rates are, disastrous. The 3-year graduation rate at CUNY's overall community colleges was about 11%. Okay. And he said, we need to do something about that to the mayor. And the mayor said, okay, I'll give you seed money. He gave him $19 million and he said, but you need to do something for me. And he asked Goldstein, what will you get as a 3-year graduation rate for these 2-year programs? And Goldstein said 50%. Okay, now we were at 11. And came back to the office. He asked me to come in and one or two others. Jay Hershenson was one and he told us the good news, $19 million. And the not so good news, 50%, which he plucked off the ceiling, had no reason to do that, and said, can you do it? And we said we would try. And we put a planning team together of people who we thought were creative and interesting from all over the university, including a bunch of our own staff from the office of now what was called SUD, the Senior University Dean's office, which was me. It's a terrible name, and we created this program for 1,100 students that you had to go full time, you got a MetroCard, you were block program, you had intrusive advisements and a lot of things. And then we measured it from day one. We were tenacious about measuring the results. And 3 years later, we had a 53% graduation rate for those 1,132 students. Now, we cheated a bit. We didn't accept students who needed remediation when we started, which clearly made we were getting the better students coming into the community colleges. But we wanted to make sure we would at least have some success. We then started to expand. We got money from Robin Hood and Gates Foundation and a couple of others. And we expanded to 4,000. And we hired an outside evaluation entity, MDRC, one of the more prominent evaluation agencies in the country, I would say. And they did a random assignment study for the 4,000 students. And the results were that this was the most successful community college program they'd ever evaluated. De Blasio comes into office in 2013, and I could tell Scott's story because 5 years later we started thinking about Gutman Community College as well. And de Blasio comes in, and anytime a new mayor comes in, you give him a laundry list of 20 things that you want, of which you almost get none, but you do it anyway. And I was called into the office by then interim Chancellor Bill Kelly, and he said, "You won't believe this. De Blasio just gave us $77 million to expand ASAP to 25,000 students. Can you do that?" And over the next 9 years, and Stephanie probably knows maybe more about it than I do, we did get to 25,000. We've measured it. But in talking in response to Ryan's question, what is interesting is that for both ASAP and Gutman, perhaps we could talk a little bit, the faculty senate and the union were immediately opposed to what we were doing. They felt that we didn't understand our students. They were poor. They were on welfare. They were single parents, all of which was true to some degree, and that we were being unrealistic. And I would always ask them, and we had town hall meetings. I went with my team from campus to campus, and some of this had to do with Gutman as well. And I would just ask everybody after there was a lot of shouting and saying, why don't you just give us the money, even from some of the community college presidents, some of our colleagues who were like, why are you doing this? Just give us the money. We can do it. It's an expensive program. And Goldstein was not about to do that. And I would simply ask them, do you know what your graduation rate is at BMCC? And the group would look at me like I was crazy. Well, why are you asking that? And I would say, well, it's 12%. And so your commitment, particularly to poor Black and brown students, is that 8 or 9 out of 10 never get to the finish line. And that we have to do better as a university. So I don't know. There were a lot of obstacles, but fortunately, the big boss did not buckle under criticism and ultimately won over a lot of people. And I don't know how it is at City Tech or other campuses. I'm 3 years out, but we've reached the 25,000. I think the last administration, the former executive vice chancellor, was not as positive about the program as perhaps some have been in the past. But it's an incredible success. So I don't know, Ron, if that answers that question.
Yeah, it does. It does, and you've touched on a lot there, and you sort of have teed up another one of my questions for you, which you mentioned the unions and some of the pushback that you felt from the union during this process. So I sort of want to turn the clock back a little bit in your book too. So, the topic of union appears multiple times over the course of your book. The first time is, you talk a bit about your parents and the ways in which they educated you as a child about labor. And then you turn to your first job teaching and your engagement with the unions at that point. So I'm wondering if you sort of might share some of that history, and also use that to frame some of your later engagements with the unions as you move some of these programs?
So, I was brought up in my parents were radicals, a contradiction. My father was a businessman. My mother was a full-time political activist. And, they brought us up, you never cross the picket line. It was just something you never, ever would do. And they were very involved with left-wing causes at the time, and they wanted to also make peace with the Soviet Union at the time as well. So I graduate from college, and I'm teaching sixth grade. I go to the first day of class, and little did I know that there had been called a strike. The teachers' union in the city called for a strike and closed down the entire system that was based on their opposition to a Ford Foundation project that was supposed to give community control of the schools to the residents of East New York, Brownsville, and who had schools that had failed their kids for years. Those of us who were teaching to avoid the draft and who had kind of, against the war and a little bit of left-wing leanings, we had a dilemma. Should we cross the picket line and side with the Black community that was trying this experiment, or should we stick to our union guns? And almost all of the young people who were entering teaching, many of us who never lasted, we were not career teachers, did cross the picket line. And we sided, and if you haven't, read about that strike, it was probably the most divisive strike in the history of New York City. And it was a very hard decision to make. Of course, at some point, the strike lasted for 6 or 7 weeks, and at some point it ended. And those of us who had crossed the picket line, many of us young and inexperienced, not necessarily very good teachers, I don't think we ever regained the confidence of the more career teachers and some of the older folks, and it was painful, and ultimately some relationships were built. Okay, when we got to doing ASAP and Gutman and other programs, the union automatically was opposed to what we were trying to do. And we were accused of all kinds of things, corporatizing the university, not understanding our students, and so forth. And I would try and say, do you have any idea about my own background and what? And the point, and I would have lots of arguments with some of my friends who politically we were very consistent with our views, but at the same time, I felt graduation rates that did not assist in students getting to the finish line. And there were some at the four-year colleges as well. It wasn't just the community colleges. Other than our flagships, our four-year colleges did not do particularly well either. And so I don't know. I had some bitter arguments with some of my friends, some of my colleagues. Ultimately, people kind of thought that I was an okay person. And we were accused of also squandering money. But the fact is, we got $77 million that added to the base budget of the university. And so even though the program cost, a good bit of extra money, that money wouldn't have never come to CUNY, except for the fact of the success of the program. And to this day, I am a huge supporter of unions and think that what's gone on in this country about union involvement. But in both the school strike, and the one thing about the schools is that, I was not a great teacher. I liked the kids a lot. But, you're not a good teacher when you first start out and you've never been in a classroom before. And I was 22 and many of them were 12 and 13. A lot of them had been held over. So you had to learn how to teach. And I respected good teachers, and I didn't care what their affiliation was, as long as they liked the kids and knew how to teach. So I don't know. That's a little bit long-winded, I guess, but
I'm wondering if you can extend it just a little bit more, actually, though, John.
yeah.
Given the experiences you've had, I'm wondering sort of what advice you would have for those of us who are part of the union and for our union.
No, I think you should be fierce advocates. I think that the union has to fight for better working conditions, for higher wages, for fairness. We had programs like CUNY Start and CLIP that started as with people with continuing ed teachers who were mostly hourlies. And the union pushed, and we were fine about it as well, kind of quietly, to make them more permanent folks. And I don't know if any of you are involved with any of those programs or not. So, and I assume that a lot of you, if you work at CUNY, are members of the PSC. I would imagine that a bunch of you are. And, I would hold them accountable. I would push them. But when it came to change about things that were not working, higher ed, not just, faculty or staff or presidents or provosts, higher ed is unfortunately very resistant to change. We had the same thing with Gutman, and where people were like, "Why do we need another community college?" And the chancellor, even though we had just started ASAP and the CUNY School of Professional Studies, which is now a major player in. He also wanted a new college that would do from scratch, nothing to do with ASAP, but would do things a bit differently. And Scott became the first president of that. So, from the point of view, one, this is not a great time to take risk. I mean, there is a lot of fear out there, and I understand that. And you have to know who your supervisor is and your boss and what you can do. You hope that they would welcome new ideas from you. But I was lucky. I was surrounded by people who thought we were really good, and many of the people I hired have become stars all over the place. They're everywhere, and we gave them opportunity. And so, the woman who ran ASAP for the university is now the senior vice chancellor for student success at SUNY. John King took him from CUNY. The woman who ran continuing ed for me is interim president of Kingsborough. The other woman who ran continuing ed is the dean of the NYU School of Professional Studies. And I could go on and on with examples of people who have, come out of our area, this non-traditional continuing ed area, and become kind of major players. And we also, the other thing is, we didn't cost anybody any money. Everything we did in the first 20 years was paid for by grants. And I say it in the book, I think, Ryan. I was a grant-funded person, and when I got the job as the dean of continuing ed after Regina left, the deputy chancellor said, "I'll appoint you, but you need to pay. Can you pay your own salary?" And I was stupid enough to say yes, I could. And then after all these years at the Research Foundation, it wasn't in my interest. So we took money from every grant to pay my salary and a lot of other people's salaries. And to the day I retired, I didn't cost the university even $1 in salary even though by then I was considered, dean of CUNY SPS, considered a president, and I was still at the central office because Goldstein wanted me to do both. So I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. You're touching on some of the politics, and you actually just mentioned something about sort of the slowness and resistance to change. When John and I had our initial conversation, we actually spoke about this book that I'm dropping into the chat right now that students in my intro class are reading these days, titled "Whatever It Is, I'm Against It." And I sort of want to turn to the politics of higher ed, or the politics within higher ed, rather. Throughout your book, you speak about the political nature of CUNY and of post-secondary education more broadly. You speak about maneuvering through bureaucracy, of the challenges of navigating people politics within our structures, and you elucidate a number of strategies for successfully advancing good programs despite opposition, despite financial constraints. So I'm wondering what your biggest takeaways that you can share with us right now are from all of that and from navigating that internal politics.
I would guess a couple things. One, do good work. You will be noticed if you're successful. And the foundation world and both city and state government are desperate for people who can do good work. And so that would be the first thing. The second thing, build relationships. And you can build the relationships by showing that you're good at what you do. And so after a while, our unit didn't even have to go solicit. The city would come to us. We have a problem with homelessness. We have a problem with early childhood. And our people became leaders and we brought in a lot of, by 2005, we were generating $70-80 million a year, $90 million a year in grants and contracts. And it was almost a quarter of all the university's dollars in grants and contracts from 24 institutions. And so, building relationships, doing your work well. And then I would say, if possible, and we were lucky in this, measure what you're doing, because all of these outside funders are looking for outcomes that are measurable. And it's very hard to do if you don't have the staff. And we were lucky because we generated so many dollars. We took money from every grant and put it into an evaluation unit that Tracy Mead actually created for us. And by the time I left, we had 32 full-time people in the central office who evaluated the programs for SUD, just them. Institutional research at the central office had about 8 people. Now, what happened subsequently is that unit was absorbed by institutional research after I left. Not a bad thing. I'm not saying at all that's a bad thing. But if at all possible, when you're involved in any kind of new program development, measure it. And then I go back to this other point that Fanny taught me: say yes to opportunity. Unless you absolutely can't do it, because we're in New York City, we can bring in talent, and particularly, you're not going to get faculty lines, you're not going to get staffing lines. We were able to do it in soft money, but the university is desperate. Even now, if you look at community college graduation rates, ASAP has done incredibly well. It's now 1/3 of all the students in community colleges, but the 2/3 that are left are not doing that much better than they did, what I'm talking about, 25 years ago. And so, those are some of the things, but it's often not in your power. That's the other thing. Your supervisors recognize your talent. And I don't know what levels each of you are at. I know you're getting your degrees and what, but I can only imagine. I had a lot of my staff went through your programs, and Brian Peterson, who's now the vice president of finance administration at the graduate school, and worked with me on grant. He worked as a grant person with HRA at the beginning, and there are many others as well. So I don't know. And I think because of the political climate at the moment, everybody's frightened, and you don't want to speak up, and you could be punished. And that's at the top levels and lower levels. And I understand it. In some ways, I'm glad I'm not here or there or wherever. Yeah. And so, those are some of the thoughts about that, Ron.
I'll ask you specifically about sort of the current moment at the end, but it's hard to not have it seep into this entire conversation for sure. I'll also just say one of the things I heard in what you were just sharing is that we need more folks who are working in higher ed who have some practitioner scholar skills, who might want to come to the doctoral program at some point. So I'll just drop that for a moment here. So I am going to change the conversation a little bit. And you and I spoke about this ahead of time. One of the most intimate moments in your book, you openly share your experience managing and overcoming panic attacks. And as someone who has also learned to manage anxiety and panic attacks, and as someone who's spoken with many of our students here and other places who can also relate to this, I just want to thank you for actually sharing that in the book. You know, a lot of people aren't willing to be that vulnerable and speak about those kinds of personal challenges. And I want to thank you also for your openness to talking about it a little bit tonight. So I'm just wondering if you might share with our audience what lessons you've learned about managing stress, anxiety, and panic attacks, particularly within the context of such a public role as the one you've had.
I'm not the best example because I don't want anyone to go through what I went through. You know, I've been a worrier my whole life, insecure, didn't think I was the greatest of students. I thrived on playing fields, but I didn't. I never thought I was that talented, not that smart. And when and this is in the book as well, and I told Ryan that it's fine for me to talk about this. I was offered a job by Regina Peruggi to come to the central office, to the small office of continuing ed. And I had said yes. But I was working because I had to get out of City Tech at the time because I didn't get the dean's job. I was very angry. I didn't like the dean who replaced Fanny. And I was at the Literacy Assistance Center as the associate director of a small nonprofit agency. And we were running a conference on youth development for youth workers and having to do with literacy. And I was moderating it. And I got up to talk. Regina was in the audience. It was, I don't know, there was 60 or 70 people, and she was there. She was interested in the topic. And all of a sudden, I felt faint. My heart was going, I don't know how many beats a minute. I mean, more than you could ever imagine. I felt I was going to faint, and I excused myself and left. Regina followed me out. She had just hired me. And she said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Oh, I'm okay." And I came back 5 minutes later, started to talk again, could not get a word out of my mouth. And I had to stop and leave. I said to her I wasn't feeling well. I thought she was going to tell me, "I'm not hiring you. You have all these problems." And for the next, I don't know, this was 1986, probably the next 10 years, I was frightened to death of speaking in public. And I just was overly prepared. And it could be as simple as introducing yourself at a public meeting. I would have a clip sheet of what I would have to say. And I was astonished when I talked to close colleagues later that no one even recognized what was going on. Ultimately, with some help and some practice, it went away, you know, but it took a very, very long time. And I'm very good at noticing when I think people are going through that emotional stress when they are giving talks or what. You can almost sense it if you've gone through it. And, you know, I feel terrible for them because I know how painful it is. But, you know, I did go into therapy, and I won't go much deeper than that, other than that the therapist said, "You have a strong constitution, you're not going to fall apart, and what's the worst that's going to happen?" So you'll be revealed as you're going through a panic attack. But any of you who've had it, it's pretty horrendous, and so it didn't get in my way, and you do everything you can to conceal it, you know, which is probably not healthy either. So that's about as far as I'll go, Ryan, on that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I think just even speaking openly like this is incredibly helpful for folks. So I'm grateful for that. So I want us to turn to questions from the audience within 10
great.
minutes. But
great.
I sort of have a couple last questions before we get there. And they're big ones. So we have 10 minutes for it. And they're related, right? In your epilogue to your book, you share your perspective on the future of higher ed. And you wrote that prior to the start of this year when things have changed quite a bit. So I'm going to sort of offer that as some context, and then also just ask sort of more broadly beyond like what the future of higher ed is, what you would be interested in focusing on if you were entering your roles at CUNY now as opposed to 50 years ago. I know you have the perspective of of nearly a half century of CUNY. And so what would you be encouraging folks to be thinking about trying to advance?
I think the major goal remains the same: student success. There's nothing more important. You have to figure out how this great urban university, engine of economic mobility, can graduate more of its students. That is, to me, single most. We've done better, somewhat better, but not good enough. And so that would be one thing. I am horrified by the idea of all these, big shots talking about how higher ed and a degree doesn't matter. And that people can go and become welders and become whatever else. A small number of people can, but every bit of data that I've looked at, particularly for poor folks and poor folks of color, is that a degree matters. And I want to ask those people who talk like that, well, where are your kids going? Are they going into some coding boot camp, or are they going to college? And I always say that not that there shouldn't be some students who go into coding boot camps, but New York City, I was on the workforce board of 4 different mayors, and we never could solve the problem of low wage work because so many of the jobs are low wage. And, so for every technology job, there were 5 home health aides and home attendants that paid, or paraprofessionals for people working with developmental disabilities. And so we never could solve it. My answer to solving it was to pay people more and give them supplemental money from the government. Not going to happen, right? So to me, I would say you are wrong about the fact that a college degree doesn't matter. Now we need to do better to get more people to the finish line. And I'm not here to say that technical training and, I don't know where boot camps for coding is going to go. I have a son-in-law who's a data guy. He's a data scientist. He says his view is AI will probably replace a lot of these places. And I don't know if he's right or not, but he's a smart guy. And so we're not very good at predicting the future either. But I think we need to fight back when we have influential, very rich people talking about that college is not worthy of our support. And I simply reject that. And I think the data rejects that. And if you can get a degree, particularly a baccalaureate degree, but an associate degree as well, an associate degree either right to job or into a 4-year college, you're going to be better off. I mean, that's what the data shows. So, and I'm not against trying to figure out alternatives. And it's, so college may not be for everybody, but I am so tired of hearing, who it's for and who it's not for. Particularly if we're going to deal with issues of inequality in this city, in this country, which now is off the table anyway. So
John, what should we be doing then? What should those of us?
Well, again, I start with academic success. I really do, and career work, which is a real priority of the chancellor. No question about that. We have to find out where our students are going, and not just their first job, but how they can compete with the privates and particularly the elites. I always say CUNY's good and best students are every bit as talented as the students who come from the elite colleges, but they don't even get a look at not that you want to work at McKinsey and places like that, but they don't even get a look. So what do? I think we do our work well. We measure it. We brag about success. We follow students more closely than we ever have. We work closely with the public schools, which we started college now was at 2 CUNY campuses. It's now at 17 campuses, and we organized 20 new early college high schools. We had a unit in my division that did all this work with the public schools. It had 120 people. We generate all kinds of money for that. And that whole question of transition from high school to college is crucially important. Now, I would need to know more about each of your roles and what you do and what you would like to do. And I'd be happy to talk to any of you afterwards. I like talking to people who are in the midst of their careers. And if you think I can be helpful to any of you, I don't look at myself as having all the answers, but, it starts with believing in our students and believing. There are too many people who blame DOE. Not that DOE is perfect, they're hardly perfect, and there's lots wrong with the public school system. But once we get the students, they're ours. And I don't want to. I'm tired of hearing about who our students are with all their gaps and deficits and frailties. We know who our students are, and if we do our job right, we're not going to assist every student, but we're going to do better. And so, I don't know. I start with that, Ryan, over and over again, and I'm not sure how much that's changed.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I hear that. I think that's a good place to push us off into the world to make that fight.
By the way, just one last thing, which it may come up in the thing. I haven't talked one word about this CUNY School of Professional Studies. And to start that new school that now has close to 5,000 students and is ranked 6th in the United States out of 370 universities and colleges in online education. Some of you may be students there for all I know, but and then we serve about 40,000 non-credit students in the school. So that's a separate story. That it's a major portion of the book, and that story is interesting as well. But go ahead, Ryan. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean that I think that it will be good during the question and answer session to tease a bit more of the book out, because there's so many programs. Obviously, SPS rather was a huge part of your career, and there are many other pieces, right? You mentioned Gutman, but we didn't talk about Gutman. And there's many other spaces. So as I said, there was no way we were going to get to all of it in just the hour that we had to have the conversation before opening to questions. But I will just sort of leave you with an opportunity for a second.
Where is Stephanie Lennon, by the way?
She is back up. She's turning her camera back on.
I hope you have had a good experience in that program, and she wrote that she's in the MS in Disability Studies, and it's Marriott Bates, who started that program, was an amazing person, and it's one of the few MS in Disability Studies in the United States. And I assume you work in the area, Stephanie. Is that true?
I'm hoping to soon. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm the one that works at ASAP currently.
Oh, that's right. My goodness, already I passed you by. So okay,
yeah.
Go ahead, Ryan. I'm sorry.
No, not at all. Stephanie's all over the place. She's wonderful. Very lucky to still have her in our community here. So no, I was just, everyone here works in post-secondary education in some form. And a lot of us are quite nervous right now, given a wide range of actions from the federal government, whether we're talking about attacks against any kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion program, whether we're talking about funding for research that takes place in higher ed. And so I'm just wondering what's on your mind right now. What advice do you have to all of us as we move through this to make sure that we're uplifting our space?
I don't know. That's very hard for me to answer. It's a depressing time. And you see glimmers of hope. I don't know what to say. I think that most of you are going to be fine. But I have no way of predicting when the response will come to what's going on in Washington, and who will be next in going after. Clearly, higher ed will be a part of that. This whole argument about DEI and diversity is shameful. It is just shameful. But I wish I could give you, something that would be encouraging other than do your job, and in your spare time, try and figure out what the resistance is going to look like. People in my generation who went through this fierce opposition to the Vietnam War and the civil rights movement, some success, but we were, threatened by going over there. It was life or death. And so this is not exactly the same. And it seems like the people are even far more punitive in a lot of ways. And so I wish I could say anything that would reassure you, but I do hope that what has begun to happen in town hall meetings and other things around the country will increase. But I don't, you have to be careful and protect yourself and your family, and it's a time where we need leadership. The president of Wesleyan has spoken out very articulately, but it's a small liberal arts elite college who I'm sure has the support of the board, doesn't get that much research money. It's more of a, undergraduate college, and they have a big endowment. So I don't know what to say, Ryan. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to cop out. I'm really not. I find it depressing. And, people have been muzzled. People are thrown out. Students are being thrown out of schools and suspended. And faculty are not gaining tenure or being removed and for saying the wrong thing. And there's going to be pushback. But I wouldn't say just go nuts, because you're vulnerable. And I don't know what positions you have or where you're working. Try and understand your own institution. What will your boss say? What will the president of your college say? What will your supervisor say? But at the same time, not be frightened that you're paralyzed. I don't know. So again, it's a lousy answer. I do not have the answer there. I really don't. And manage your stress, as someone just put in the chat. But do good work. Help our students. They're struggling as well. Look at CUNY. One of the programs I got involved with was Dreamers. I was approached by the publisher of the Washington Post, Don Graham. I wasn't, the CUNY was. When we had J.B. Milliken as the president, he said, I have a foundation. I'm giving out money to all over the country for Dreamers, for scholarships. CUNY, you're barely at the table. And by 2 years later, we had 50% of all the money that Graham was putting out for Dreamers. How do we help our Dreamers? How do we help our undocumented students when they're going to be assaulted? And I hope that the university, and I'm confident that it will, be protective of our students. And I don't know how that translates, but I sure hope that it does. But I wish I could say. It's not that I'm not hopeful, but it's someone, my age, I think of myself as young, but I'm not. And that 4 years of the rest of my life is a sizable amount of years. And I hate the idea that, and I'm saying this, it's being recorded. I don't, but I'm retired. So, and I don't know. I gave it my best shot, Ryan. I don't know what to say.
I appreciate you grappling with probably an impossible question and offering some good nuggets there. I think I appreciated the words, and I think others did as well. So thank you for that. I do want to make sure we have time for folks here to ask some questions. So let's open it up for all of you. Certainly feel free to raise a hand if you want to ask directly. Certainly preferable if you would do that, but if you're not in a place when you can do that and want to ask a question, you can certainly drop it into the chat as well.
Yeah, please feel free to ask anything you wish. You really push me.
I'll ask if no one else has something. You mentioned the literacy program that you were involved with in the prison system. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that. I'm really interested in prison education systems.
Sure, sure. I came into the jail and it was a detention facility, people waiting trial, and it was pretty clear that there were a lot of people who had ended their formal education without being able to read very, very well. And also a number that wanted a high school equivalency diploma. We didn't have any money that first year. I was a graduate student, so we used inmates who were more educated to tutor those that were less educated. And I used some of the reading knowledge that I had gotten from my days as a public school teacher. Although I was gearing this to adults, and we got money and we expanded it, we ran it. The university, 4 or 5 colleges got involved. We went to Rikers Island. We went to what was called the Tombs, to other correctional facilities upstate. And we were very serious about that. But it was a detention facility. And so you never knew who was going to be there when next week's classes came about, because someone could be getting out in bail. Someone could have been pled guilty or shipped upstate. And, in some ways I romanticized the people in the jail. I was kind of, I thought many of them were political prisoners, and whether they were or not, but literacy became the cornerstone of what we did. And so when I finished the jail after 3 years, we got this country was giving money, federal money and state and city money for adult literacy. And we jumped on it. I met my wife in a literacy program. She was running one of our literacy programs. And we brought a bunch of the people who worked with us at City Tech at New York Community, the central office, and the people who organized the work for ASAP and CUNY Language Immersion Program and CUNY START and Gutman all came out of literacy and high school equivalents. And we had some faculty who were involved with remediation as well. But so I went past the prison stuff, but the prison stuff was fascinating. And I never was totally comfortable. In those days, we took over a floor of the jail. They gave us a floor as the school floor. And anyone who wanted to be in an education program transferred to the school floor. And I would go around this 11-story vertical building, which is now a hole in the ground in downtown Brooklyn, for any of you who now they're going to be building some new facility. I would wake the men up and say, you'd yell on the gate, you get in and, all right, let's go, school's starting and what. And I try to hire really good teachers who understood. I hired one of my college roommates, which you probably shouldn't do, but he's a John Jay professor and he wrote one of the best books ever written about youth and police, called The Ville, Cops and Kids in Urban America. And he was a master teacher and try to get people who could relate to the people who were waiting for their day in court. So I don't know. The system is not so great anymore, any better, right? I mean, far less numbers are in the system than have been. But, this whole question of after, people leaving jail and what happens to them, I don't know. My niece is very involved in that. She's a law professor at Brooklyn Law. She started kind of the human trafficking program out of legal aid and has become a national figure in women getting out of jail. But Kate Mogulescu, some may know her. But so I thank you for the question. But as I said, I was never comfortable, but I would go in on my free time, just hang out in the day rooms. Got my hair cut. Got a portrait drawing. I got to know a lot of people, so it was interesting. Oh, I should add that the correctional officers initially hated us and they didn't like us, but they were big sports people. And it was the time when the Knicks are kind of going to win the world championship, and just won one and we're about to win the second. And I said, well, we played some basketball. I played basketball in high school and 1 year of college. I was a better tennis player. But And I said, well, why don't you play us? And Greg Donaldson was the 6'4" starting forward in our college team. He was a good Division I player. And I brought my roommate from college, who was the captain of our team, and we just kicked their asses. And we came in the next day, and the whole dynamics had changed. They all of a sudden saw us differently, even though we had long hair. They thought we were hippie-like. We would invite them over to the college to play ball after the shift. And it was, and you'd watch and you'd see who were the officers who got along and can control the floor of 200 men, and who had chaos and were always ringing the panic button and bringing up the riot squad. And you could tell, you really could. All right, other questions?
Thank you.
I see
I'm going to push
Sam's
you
head, and I saw Carson was unmuting as well. So go for it, Sam.
Yeah. So I'll try to make my question as encompassing as possible. So I know especially for me, so when I joined CUNY, it was the first time that I was in a union. But it was something that was very, attractive to me to work for CUNY, to work in public service and work in public education. And my question to you is that in a time that we are currently facing a very anti-union federal administration, how do you suggest people who are first entering unions, what are the first things that they should really know about their own union, and what is an easy way for them to get involved that doesn't seem so that really is, what's like low-hanging fruit to get involved with your own union?
I don't know. I mean, I assume there, as I understand it, there is a union kind of chapter in every campus, and they're leaders, and included, some of them are related to the faculty senate folks. One, are you satisfied with what the union is delivering to you or not, and how you measure that? And, it's very hard to get wage increases at the moment. It has been for the last 15, 20 years. It has not been easy. The last one contract, 7 years, you got 11%, right? And not fabulous, but you can, if you ask to engage with the union, my guess is you'll be welcome, that people will want to have you really participate. And then the question is, the PSC has been an activist union, and I think that's a good thing. They've gotten into issues as well, and so that's another way to get to know them as to what they're doing, social justice wise, and can you get involved and engaged? And if it's not on your campus, there's a central leadership. For most of my time, the woman by the name of Barbara Bowen was the head, and before that, Erwin Pasha. And I remember, and this is kind of crazy, that when Pasha was kind of a stand, I went to the celebration. Even though I was management at the time, I just thought, I wanted to show that I was supportive of the new leadership. So I don't have any specifics, Sam. I just don't. But approach them. How can I get engaged? What can I do? I want to get more involved, and see where it goes.
I'm happy to give a few ideas there too. So number one, right, make sure that you're paying your union dues. And number two, make sure that you're on the email list, because there's regular updates for actions and meetings and whatnot. Number three is to get engaged with your community chapter of the union. And then I would also even just say, follow the union on social media, because you'll actually see when events are coming and when actions are coming. So that's where I would start. And the more you want to get involved, the happier any union would be for additional support and leadership, for sure. So, Carson, I don't know if you're still here. I've lost you on the screen. But if I saw you unmuting. I don't know if you had.
That was accidental unmute. Sorry.
Oh, never mind then. Catherine, I see a question from you in the chat. I'll read it for you unless you want to unmute. I'll give you a second in case you want to join. Maybe you're not able to. So Catherine's question here is, what are your thoughts about AI in higher education and how can institutions best leverage it?
I have no idea. I'm not a technology person. I was surrounded by people who were good. I hired people who were. So I barely can understand it. I speak to my son-in-law, and he thinks positive way it can be good as add-ons. But where it's going, I'm the wrong person. I'm sorry. I'm just the wrong person to ask. I am it's not something I know about, and the world has passed me by in that way. And I'm sorry. I wish I had an answer. Clearly, it is. Obviously, you have things like people writing papers for you, but and how do you prevent that? But as far as how it will impact, I think there'll be good and bad. But I can't speak on it. I'm sorry. I wish I could.
Well, there are
that's
a lot
another
of
thing I would, Ryan, another thing I would say, when you add forms and you don't know the answer, fess up. Don't try and fight. It doesn't work. And people who do know are going to find out you don't know and that you're full of it. So that's a...
Be honest about your limitations and where your expertise lies. I'm all for that. Veronica, your hand is up.
Good evening. It sounds like you were a trusted leader at CUNY, right? You got a lot of things done. You started things up from the ground. And my question to you is, what's the best way to gain allies, right? Because CUNY is a big political system in the end, even internally, right? And so how do you gain the trust of people to be able to build something like the schools and the programs that you've built?
I would say start locally with your own school. Do you work at CUNY now, Veronica?
Yes, I'm at Baruch now, and previously I was at Macaulay Honors College
Oh, you
Central.
were?
Yeah,
Okay. And you're at Baruch now?
I'm at Baruch now. Yep.
I don't know the environment at Baruch, but I would start, as I said, locally. Go to meetings, speak up. Have lunch with people occasionally. Try and figure out who are the leaders, who do you admire, and kind of build relationships, and then try and figure out. I don't know what area are you in, Veronica?
John,
I
No, I
didn't
guess
hear you.
people.
You
Can
froze.
anyone? Oh, I froze. Okay, sorry. But Veronica, where are you working? What
I'm in
area?
the honors program. I oversee the honors program at Baruch. Yeah.
Okay. You probably have wonderful students who come in very well prepared. You want to make sure that they have opportunity, and then you want to think that what have you learned by working with the very most prepared of your successful, if that's possible. Now, the other question is, how much time do you have and room to do things beyond your own job? I was fortunate in that everyone I worked with in our unit thought it would be fun to do different and new things. And so when we got a project assigned, I go to 8 people and 7 of them would say, of course, love to do it. And so you have to be able to kind of take advantage of when exciting new things are happening at your college and the president or your provost or your boss is looking for input, that you try and engage. But it's not easy to do in this environment. I'm really well aware of it. And I feel so fortunate that I had leaders who trusted us and didn't care about our credentials. And so I think, how do you get noticed? You get noticed by doing good work, by bringing in some extra money, by showing students that you care about them, and building relationships and friendships in some ways, and helping out people who are in distress at times, and saying so. And it's still not easy, and I don't know, where everybody works in the environment and whether you're happy. But again, going back to what I said, when you get ready for your next move, and most of you will have the one or many more, do some homework and try and figure out who you're going to be working for, even if it sounds like a good opportunity on its own.
Thanks for that. I think that's actually a really good segue to one final question that Andrew put in the chat. I don't know, Andrew, do you want to just ask your question? I see that you're on screen, so.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Thank you, John, for actually sharing all the knowledge and experience that you've actually, definitely endured during your time frame within higher education. Though, for I myself, I wanted to ask, I'm definitely a newbie when it comes to higher education. Though, currently, I'm a caseworker / education advocate for the juvenile justice population, though, for a nonprofit. So, trying to enter the higher education workforce has been very difficult to get into. I just wanted to hear your advice, though, for anybody that's trying to seek, employment without a higher education background. What advice would you give?
I assume you're not looking for a faculty job, Andrew, or are you?
Honestly, I'm initially interested in like student services generally, but with higher education, that's just like the tip of the iceberg when it comes to higher education, though. But just wanted to hear your advice.
Yeah, so this whole question of juvenile justice and youth are critically important, and there are lots of colleges that have. Now the problem is you have the student services kinds of things, which I think you would be, let me start by saying you have to find out what the jobs are, and whether and start applying at the same time, and you'll have a degree, I assume, in this extra degree before too long, and think of so our unit was huge, and we would welcome someone with your buzz, and we also at SPS hired someone, a bachelor's in youth development, and so you have to kind of look around and say, okay, here are my skills, here is my work experience, but at the same time understanding that if it's a really good job, competing with 100 people who are applying for it, and people say it's not significant, but it is, because it somehow can open up the door to get yourself in the door for an interview at least. And so is there other people that you is there someone who you were mentored by, who were helpful? John Jay, for example, has a huge area of restorative justice and people coming out of jail and juvenile justice. Have you looked at their programs, for example? And so I don't know. A unit doesn't quite exist as the way it did before. So I would look at the K-12 unit that's in the university. That's a big unit, and it deals with a lot of young people. And it's the dean is Andrea Sunachan, used to be a woman by the name of Cass Conrad, and see what they're involved. Speak to the person at SPS who her name is Sarah Zella Berkman. She is phenomenal, and she's always open to helping people who are looking for opportunities. And so, and I would be happy to talk to you at some later point as well, if you were interested.
That's all really helpful advice. And Andrew, we always are encouraging folks to just reach out to one another and ask for that informational interview. And Sam Pardo, who's right on the screen here, should also be a huge resource for you in our career services office. So use the resources and don't be afraid to ask to have conversations with folks. So thank you for all of that, John. I just want to share a few final things with folks. I'm going to drop something that might look totally foreign to folks. But what I just put into the chat is the call number for John's book. We have 3 copies at Baruch. So if you would like to go read the book, everybody can race over to the Newman Library stacks right now and see who can grab the books the fastest. I made sure that the library ordered them ahead of this event so that folks can go ahead and access them. There are a number of other copies floating around CUNY as well. So when those 3 get taken up by folks here, you can use our interlibrary loan to grab another copy. And if you want to find your own copy as well, I will drop the link one more time to John's website here for the book. John, thank you so much. I've had such a good time talking with you tonight, preparing for this. I learned quite a bit from the book. I learned quite a bit about Gutman, even after my years of working there as well. I got really great insights into CUNY, and I recommend particularly folks who are part of CUNY, but anyone here who's working across our post-secondary ed system, to take a look at it, and to also take advantage of John's offer to have a conversation with them. I don't know, John, is the easiest way to contact you through that website?
I still have a CUNY email address. You can just john.mogulescu@cuny.edu. I'm very good. One of the things Fanny taught me, even though we didn't have email at the time, you return phone calls, you return now emails, and I was fanatical about that with my own staff. I mean, there is no delay. You just do it. It's a huge help. You start meetings on time. You don't wait for the last person to come in, or you come in because you have the status and the power. Things that are common sense, Fanny taught me from day one, and I want to thank you guys for sticking this out. It's a weeknight and you are busy and you work, and I greatly appreciate it. And Scott and Ryan, thank you for setting, and Samantha, thank you, the 3 of you for setting this up. It's a gloomy time. And just one other thing, I couldn't promote my book better than Ryan has done it. But if you are interested if you are interested in purchasing, whether it's an electronic version or soft cover or whatever, just don't go to Amazon. If you could do me a favor, go to the website. And it's my own bias, but I just would. It's my preference, and the book is engaging, and it really does tell a lot of the CUNY history in the last 50 years, and it gets a little edgy at the end as well, I would say. So, but yeah. It's nice. It's nice I wish I could see you all in person, and maybe one day I'll come back for an in-person class or whatever. So.
Yeah. We'd love that, especially once we have a doctoral program here. You can come talk to those students as well, John.
I would be glad to. Thank you, everybody. Have a nice evening.
Thank you all so much for being here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take care.
John, I'm going to reach out